Good morning or afternoon, depending where you are, and welcome to today's webinar following a community of practice format that will allow us to learn, exchange, and act on the topic of return to work, focus on an employee's mental health. I'm really thrilled to have Lori Casselman. She's the CEO and CRO of Wello Virtual Healthcare here with us today to talk about this really important and timely topic. Wello Virtual Healthcare is actually a partner with WellnessWorks Canada, and we really enjoy working with you guys. You're very progressive and offer some pretty timely, well, always relevant, but especially relevant today, supports for people. So my name is Victoria Granger, and I am with WellnessWorks Canada, and we'll be moderating today's session and piping in at the end for the Q&A portion as well. So if you have not heard of WellnessWorks Canada, we have a vision of building a healthier, higher performing Canadian population and economy, one organization at a time, so really focusing in on the organization. As an association, we support both workplace wellness practitioners and employers in building healthy, high-performing work cultures. And we do that really by empowering you with simple, and our members with simple, evidence-informed, cost-effective resources, tools, education and certification that bridges the gap between employee well-being and organizational performance. But one quick announcement before we jump into this. So for those that don't know, our individual memberships are actually offered at an introductory rate right now, and so they're only $100 for an individual annual membership, and they're going to stay that way just throughout until the fall as we all navigate this pandemic together. And in less than 1 week, as a part of that membership, as a really value add, we'll be offering the first of its kind, a workplace health and performance ambassador certification for individuals who are working in or contributing to this industry and supporting employee health and organizational performance. So it's we're excited because we're using this really innovative platform that's self-paced, and it offers an asynchronous, easy to use program that gives you the tools and resources that you need to support both employee well-being and organizational performance, and then also gives you some tailored feedback from an expert to support you on that journey. So I am excited about this, to talk about this today. And Lori, I've just noticed for some reason that we have a little not broadcasting show on here. So I just want to use the Q&A function here. And for those participants that we have on here, can you just let me know through this question and answer function that you are hearing us? Oh, I'm seeing you guys answering us now, and it sounds great. Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. Just wanted to confirm that. All right. So that is it for our announcements today. So I just wanted to go through the short housekeeping here. So for the learn portion of this presentation, it will be about 20 minutes in length, and we're going to have lots of time for question and answer for everybody that's participating. We want to have a really kind of interactive discussion. And so I'm really excited to hear from Lori Casselman again, who's the CEO and CRO of Wello Virtual Healthcare. She is a really dynamic and innovative business leader. She has over 20 years of leadership experience in the healthcare, group benefits, and technology domains. She also has a wealth of expertise, previously holding several executive positions with Sun Life Financial, and has served as a chief officer at League as well. So she's really passionate about the power of partnership and enabling strategic alignment with startups and global enterprise organizations. And she's also on the advisory boards of Move the Dial and Tech for Sick Kids Hospital. So really thrilled to have her here. So as I was mentioning, we do have this community practice format today. So we want to have an interactive, engaging discussion. So feel free to use the Q&A function throughout today's session to share any questions that you have going throughout. And then we also have lots of time at the end for interactive discussion. And we hope you can also share your experiences and your personal stories of what has been working for you in terms of helping to support people's mental health as we all go to transition back to work in some shape or form. So without further ado, I pass it on to Lori, and looking forward to hearing from you, Lori.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Victoria. So really pleased to be here today with Wellness Works. Always a great opportunity when we can get together as a community and talk about important issues. And I think as we think about employee health and returning our employee groups back into the workplace, but also think about how we continue to support individuals who are working remote. And I would say perhaps most importantly, how we support the mental health of employee groups during these particularly challenging times. Obviously top of mind for so many of us. And as I said, it's just great to have a forum and some space in our day to have this conversation and to share learning and insight. So I did just want to add to Victoria, to your point, really happy to take questions throughout. So if I can rely on you to just sort of manage the intake of any questions, and then please feel free to interrupt me with anything that's sort of pertinent as I go through the content. I'd
Absolutely.
love to hear from people and have a dialogue. Okay, so with that, I'll just jump in here. And bear with me for a sec here. We're trying out some new functionality here on my end. Okay, so Victoria, can you see me? Are my slides progressing now?
Sorry, yes, I can. Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, we can see the slides progress and it looks good.
Okay, good stuff. They seem to be somewhat sticking here, so I'm not sure what's happening on that front. Okay, bear with me.
I can always progress for you if you like as well.
Yeah, okay, why don't we do that?
Sure.
So they seem to be sticking on my end a little bit here. So I'm just on the learning outcomes slide.
Perfect. Yep, it looks great.
Okay, so high level. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to really understand and stay attuned to stress and anxiety for those employees who are looking to reintegrate into a modified workplace environment. And perhaps in terms of modifications, that may mean that we have employees who are continuing to work remote from their homes alongside some employee groups who may be returning into a physical workspace. And so I think there's important sort of community and collaboration considerations there. Also, really just paying attention to how we continue to support mental health as a priority, both as we continue to work our way through aspects of the pandemic and of, isolation and social distancing, and as well as we consider returning into the workplace. And then lastly, we'll touch a little bit also on just productivity overall and some strategies that we can put in place to ensure that we have high levels of productivity and engagement, as well as high levels of communication with employees within our organizations. And then, as Victoria mentioned, we'll make sure that we dedicate a little bit of time here to questions and answers throughout. So I think it goes without saying that over the last 3 months, we have really seen and felt, I think, ourselves, regardless of the type of organization that you're working in, for the most part, across all industries and organizational segments, we're seeing that businesses have really transformed and had to adapt throughout these last few months as we worked our way through a pandemic and a very quick transition to remote work, as well as just adapting to a new norm and new way of working in many organizations. So I think one of the most important things that we have seen occur is this really transition into a much more significant digital environment. And so I think the use of digital tools for communication, for sharing of documentation, for sharing of communications, and really for educating and networking in events like this has definitely grown in prominence through these last couple of months. So, I've been doing probably 2 to 3 webinars like this with various communities each week. And I think it's been a really important opportunity for us to stay connected with individuals outside of our organizations, which I think from a mental health perspective has been really critical as well. I've heard from a lot of colleagues and folks in my network that one of the things that has really been impactful during these last, I'd say these last 2 months in particular, is this feeling of disconnect really from the environment outside of our own work colleagues and our own team. You know, when we're in a normal environment, we're often going to meetings, going to conferences, you know, community and networking events on a pretty frequent basis for many of us. And so that opportunity to connect with others outside of our work teams, you know, is a really important one to, you know, just consistently bring new information and ideas, you know, to us. And to some degree, with this transition, I think many of us have really been feeling that disconnect. And so finding the opportunities to connect with the community has been really critical. And so again, I thank Wellness Works and Victoria for creating such an opportunity for us today. Something else I just really want to point out, we've seen some great announcements from organizations like Google, Twitter, Shopify, who have made announcements that they will continue to keep employees remote for the foreseeable future, really because they're able to do so, and there is no significant need to bring employees back into a physical workplace in order to see the highest levels of productivity. Unfortunately, not all organizations are in that position. So depending on the industry that you work in, you know, for example, retail, you may have employees who have to be in a physical workplace in order to conduct your business. And so I think it's just really important as we take a look at our broader workforces and as we think about, you know, our counterparts in various industries, we're cognizant of the fact that it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. As we transition back into some sense of norm as we go into the back half of the year. We need to pay attention to various individual and employee needs, but also think about our own businesses and how we best conduct our business in relation to all of these new demands. So we will see probably more and more employees looking for remote work or work from home accommodations or options. And again, I think it's not a one size fits all. And so it's important to be communicating with employees if that's not a scenario that makes sense in your work environment or for their role. Really just being direct and transparent about why that is, but also being flexible in looking at ways that you could potentially support that, even if it is on a part-time basis for employees who are really looking for those options. So from a mental health perspective, there's been incredible data that's been produced, particularly over the last few weeks. I've seen a number of announcements made by organizations who have done surveys and polls, both in the community and publicly, around the rise in mental health symptoms and concerns. And so I think it goes beyond this sense of we think, you know, there is an increase in the level of anxiety, you know, potentially boredom, isolation, sadness, or depression. You know, some of the terms that we are really hearing within our own organizations and hearing sort of in the market and in our communities. There is significant symptoms that are coming into play as well. I know in our organization, as we take a look at our members who are coming into access virtual care supports and resources, we have most definitely seen an increase in the prevalence of questions or seeking out support in the mental health category, particularly with regard to depression and anxiety disorders. And so ultimately, all of that is to say this is a real challenge. We do anticipate that this challenge is going to continue. And in fact, it is likely going to increase as we go into the third and fourth quarter of this year. And so I think really it goes without saying that the need for mental health resources, the need for communication and support around mental health has never been greater. And one particular statistic that I saw last week come out from Sun Life Financial, actually, through a survey they did of the Canadian population, was that 56% of Canadians are now indicating that COVID-19 is having a negative impact on their mental health. And as a follow-up question in that particular survey or that poll, it was also asked if those individuals are seeking support for those mental health concerns. And unfortunately, the results indicated that 60% were not currently seeking support. And so I think, really the challenge there is twofold. Number one, making sure that we are, having the conversation and encouraging those who need support to identify that and to reach out for support, but also to ensure that we have resources available to really direct employees to, or to provide to employees who are needing that support. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on here as well. So from a fatigue perspective, as we think about, what are the particular impacts that employees are feeling? They'd say they fall into a number of categories. And as we're having the conversations within our own organization here at Live and Wello, and as well, as we're participating in these external webinars and events, one of the things I'm hearing the most is just really around these feelings of fatigue. So, and I would say in particular over the last few days, in relation to everything that's happening in North America, as a result of, the increased focus on racism. And unfortunately, some of what we have seen happen with regard to George Floyd, incredibly concerning, I think for a lot of people. It's caused increased amount of time on media, on social media, really following the news. And that is also significantly contributing to feelings of stress and anxiety and fatigue. For many people, it's, this feeling of wanting to do more and wanting to be involved and to take a position and to act, but not necessarily knowing how to do so, which can cause an increased level of frustration, resentment, and anger. So, we're in a time of just incredible stress and anxiety across the board, both as it relates to the pandemic and, some of the after effects of coming out of time of social isolation, but also as it relates to current events. And I don't want to undermine the impact of these current events. We all need to be paying attention to what's happening and really be engaging in the way that feels appropriate to each of us as individuals and as organizations. But I do think it's very important to point out that this is, it's causing incremental amounts of fatigue, anxiety, and stress for individuals within our organization.
Thanks. Hi, Lori. So I have actually a question here from somebody, and I guess it just goes back to relating to people from working from home. So Akeem's question is, do you believe there is a correlation between mental health symptoms that are potentially increasing because of the people who are working from home? I think you might be getting into this later, but it says, if so, would permanent work from home arrangements be wise in light of?
Yeah, so I think I would start with, back to the point of it really is not a one size fits all, both within any organization or for any group of individuals. So, I guess to the point of, is remote work causing an increased amount of stress and fatigue for some individuals? It certainly may be. So I think to a large extent that depends on personal situation. So, I know in our organization, we have individuals who are at home with young children. We have individuals who may be at home on their own. You have individuals in small spaces, larger spaces, et cetera. All of those things start to contribute to, your personal sort of adaptation and feelings throughout this process. And so, as I said, I think it's unique to every individual. And as an organization, you really need to just take into consideration how you personalize policies and practices go forward. And so if it's possible, depending on the type of work that employees are doing, to allow them the opportunity to continue to work and to do so productively and effectively, then, I would certainly encourage consideration of how you make that work. And then I would say on the flip side of that, if you have individuals who are really looking to start work outside of their home and to return to the physical workspace, really taking into consideration how you can make that possible is important as well. In addition, I would say really communicating with employees tools, tips, guidance around, how they make these scenarios work. So, I think in our organization, really taking opportunities, we do a daily huddle, just as an example. And on that huddle, we often encourage the members of our team who have been working through, these last few months to share what's been working for them. What unique things have they done? How have they really been able to get creative around managing their workday and their work demands? But also, how have they really been taking care of themselves and focusing on self-care? What kind of tactics or tools that they've employed, on a day-to-day basis, can they share with one another so that we can all really just continue to learn and to find new ways to adapt, again, to the stresses that are being put in front of each of us. So I think the bottom line is it's not a one-size-fits-all, but the important thing is to just really be listening, be creative, be communicating, and be looking for ways to sort of personalize and support the needs of every individual in the organization. So I think this probably actually, it's a good segue because it speaks back to this this point around, is it better for employees to stay remote or to return to a physical workspace? I think the number one thing is it really depends on the organization and the organizational needs. But in addition to that, it really is a matter of looking at what employees are really seeking out in terms of support. And so to that point, there is some great data. This data was from Mercer. And it indicated that 25% of employees are ready to return to a regular work schedule. And 75% of the employees in this particular survey felt that they would prefer to work from home more often and only go into a physical workspace when it's needed or when they're required to do so. So in terms of safety around return to work, I'd say there's two components to this that, we often talk about with our clients. And, in sessions like this, the first component is whether or not the work environment itself, so the physical workspace, is safe. And there are incredible resources from a health and safety perspective around how to maintain a healthy and safe physical work environment, cleaning practices, social distancing practices, et cetera. And so, I would encourage HR leaders and individuals who are responsible for health and safety within organizations to really continue to seek out the latest updates in terms of requirements and also best practices to put those protocols in place to ensure a safe physical work environment. Second to that is the importance of screening individuals who are returning into that work environment. And so, I know in our organization, we've put together some tools to take people through the provincial guidelines around screening questionnaires. So for example, if you have traveled recently, if you have experienced any symptoms of COVID-19, if you have been exposed to any individual who has had symptoms or who has had a diagnosis with regard to coronavirus. So really going through those questions on a daily basis as a screen prior to returning into the physical workspace is incredibly important. So I think that level of education and awareness around, what the symptoms are and what best practice is from a screening perspective is critical. And again, it's an ever-changing dynamic. So even provincially, we're seeing nuances in the provincial screening questionnaires. And so staying up to date, depending on the province in which you live and reside, with what the provincial health authorities are recommending from a screening protocol is incredibly important. And ensuring that employees who do seek to return to physical workspace, or organizations who are looking to return employees to work, are following those protocols. Ultimately, that is best practice in ensuring that you're covering all bases as we look to start to reintegrate employees into physical workspaces. So from a mental health awareness perspective, a number of things that, we are really recommending, and I think to some extent, these aren't outside of what would be typical in best practice around reducing stigma and managing mental health within organizations. But I think it's important that we, continue to remind ourselves of those best practices, outside of sort of current state, and then also add in any elements that are specifically related to what we're experiencing as a result of the pandemic and our current situation. So number one, and I would say it's number 1, 2, and 3, is the importance of communication. Communication, communication, communication. So first of all, making sure that there are regular instances and modalities for leaders to communicate with employees within the organization around what's happening. So if there's changes in policies or practices, if there's changes in sort of current state or the direction to employees around what's happening in the organization, having a regular cadence of communication is critically important. It's important for employees to really feel connected, to feel informed, and really to manage their mental health. It's important in terms of how they make plans, how they communicate with their families, and how they ensure that they're able to manage their personal situation as well, depending on the evolving demands of their job and of their work environment. Having regular conversations about the fact that, this is a highly unusual time, about the fact that we have added elements of stress into the day-to-day for many employees, about the fact that this is not a normal scenario that we've been in these last few months, and I expect for many individuals into the next few months as well. I heard a quote that I think is it's pretty relevant and I think resonating words for me in particular, which was the fact that we need to just really be reminding ourselves that, we're not just working from home. We haven't just transitioned people to, working from an office environment or a physical work environment to working from home. We have transitioned entire workforces, entire communities to working from home environments while they're dealing with a pandemic, while they have kids at home with them, while they have competing family demands and needs. And so it's anything but the norm. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we're accepting of that. And then also as we are considerate of that, as we look to, start to return into, again, some employees going back into a physical environment where those constraints start to be lifted, but some employees who are continuing to work remote and perhaps can't actually find childcare support, so that really that scenario is continuing for them. So being considerate of unique situations, I'll just say again, is one of the most important things that we can be doing as organizations, but also really just continuing to look for ways to communicate with employees around those scenarios, call them out, right? Speak to what we can be doing to really understand one another and create opportunities for everyone to be engaging in those conversations. Something else that has really become top of mind, I would say, for us within our own organization, but we're hearing from a lot of our clients as well, just around policies and practices as it relates to vacation use. And I think it's been really important for us to be encouraging employees to use their vacation, even though they aren't perhaps traveling anywhere or doing what would be typical during vacation time. Just taking time to step away from work is critically important. I think, probably if we were to poll the group that's on the call today, we would all agree. We are spending more and more time working, even as we're at home. Many of us are working longer hours. It's more difficult to disconnect from work, given it's right here in our homes with us every day. And so, the importance of just finding ways to check out and just take time with family, take time for self-care, and just vacate, the day-to-day of work is incredibly important. And so, taking a step back and not necessarily sort of compiling or aggregating all of that vacation time until you have a moment where you can go back and do normal things. With vacation time, that may not happen in the foreseeable future. So create space and time to disconnect from work as you typically would with a vacation. I'm just going to pause for a moment here and just, Victoria, do we have any questions or any comments for folks on the call?
I don't see any up right now. Oh, I have one. As soon as you asked that, there's a question. Somebody's just asking if it'll be available to run through again. Yes, it will be. We will have a recording and we'll send you the link afterwards. Yeah, I don't see any other questions. I love what you've been sharing so far about the personalization and that flexible use of vacations, because like you said, so many of us are working from home and managing multiple demands, maybe working more and not getting, even though a vacation won't look like it would have looked before, but not still getting that, just that downtime and that quiet time. I have a question here. It says, what are your thoughts just on work-life balance? And you touched a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would start with the fact that, I think the concept of work-life balance is a bit of a, it's a bit of an interesting one. I would say I like to talk about it less as work-life balance and more as work-life fluidity. That's something that's pretty personal to me. I have found throughout my career and, in my family life as well, there are moments where I am spending much more time working than I would like, and moments where I really try and sort of carve out time to focus on my family, depending on what's happening with my kids or what's happening in my family or personal life, where I'm perhaps doing less time or less focus on work and really dedicating more time towards family. And so I say that because balance, I think, has been out of reach to a large extent for me personally. It's tough to get balance across the board. But what I have found is there's trade-offs, right? And depending on the demands of your time or the demands in the moment, in different aspects of your life, I think it's just important to have the flexibility you need from your employer and your organization. And I think if you're a leader or a manager, to provide the flexibility that employees need so that they can really sort of personalize what balance or, what that work-life dynamic looks like for them. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that point about that flexibility. And even sometimes I've heard a lot of people use the word integration as well, because work is life and you sometimes have to enjoy the moments at work as well, right? And I mean, yeah, the balance piece, like you said, is so tough for so many of you, so many of us, but having that flexibility to support that integration is really helpful.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing, like I said, is flexibility, right? So everyone is different. What works for me in terms of being able to sort of find some sort of equilibrium or balance in your work and home life might not be the same thing that works, for the person to my left and the person to my right, in turn, hypothetically speaking, right, in my work environment. And so again, just having that flexibility of when you start and end your workday, how you get your work done, how you take time out for your mental health and for your family sort of throughout your day. And I'd say it's more important now than ever because everything is sort of happening in one space for many of us, right? So it's tougher and tougher to disconnect.
So tough for sure. I have another question comment here from Jade. It says, what do you suggest when attempting to communicate this to our senior and executive team in order for them to see it as a priority? She's a leading mental health first aider team and attempting to have communications to have that drafted to send out to all staff in regard of support in mental health. But that's been proven really difficult for her. So she says the only emails that so far they've been receiving is about reduced pay and who's been terminated. So that's a tough situation.
Yeah, absolutely a tough situation. So, without necessarily understanding all of the context or all of the dynamics in the organization, I would say a couple of things. So, be persistent in terms of ensuring that leaders can really kind of understand the data points. That's probably my second point beyond persistence is to provide data to leaders and executives who perhaps aren't totally getting it, let's say, in terms of the need. I think the data is really, really compelling. I shared that particular, I shared a couple of data points, actually, if you go back to the recording or the slides, just around the increased prevalence of mental health symptoms, concerns, and needs. And I think that goes back to a large extent to what's happening within organizations. So if there have been terminations and layoffs, that is likely significantly impacting the anxiety levels of employees that are still in the organization. I'm sure there's fear. I'm sure there's concerns for the stability of their own jobs. And so on that point, I would go back to the sort of comment I made earlier around the importance of very transparent and honest communication with employees on a regular basis. So ensuring that those employees who perhaps, are still in their jobs, but they've lost colleagues as a result of terminations or layoffs, are feeling secure if they are secure in the organization. But if the organization itself is still in an uncertain position, perhaps as a result of financial constraints or economic changes, being transparent about that, right? So times are still difficult. It's difficult to foresee what the sort of short and long-term future may look like. And then I would say not making promises that there isn't a level of confidence that you can fulfill upon. So I think in times like this, trust is critical. Honesty and open communication, are directly correlated with building a sense of trust and confidence that even if the answer is not, what an individual wants to hear as an answer or the result, the result that's ideal, at least there is a sense of confidence that, I am going to be communicated with honestly and openly. And, if leaders in my organization know that something is changing, I will know as soon as it's appropriate for me to know. Nothing's going to be kept from me and there won't be any surprises.
Yeah, that's so powerful, right? To have that. So that, I mean, and there's so much research too that goes back to show that when, even there is uncertainty, but having this open environment that fosters trust with transparency and involving people in some of those bigger decisions too as they navigate changes can be so powerful. But even back to that point about sharing those data points that or data sets and that kind of thing. I also read a study about, I think it was the mental health index. Mona Chappelle said something about how, I think it was 8 out of 10 now. There's all these different studies being done now, but 8 out of 10 organizations that were surveyed, I think there were 300 of them, said that our employees are feeling that, that they need that support for their mental health. And so It's tough for leaders because you're trying to navigate this change and uncertainty and make sure the business stays alive. But obviously the people in it, as you know, we're talking to the converted here, need to be supported and have that support that they need to manage their mental health as they're going through this difficult situation as well. So yeah, lots of good points from that you've already shared today here, Lori, on and different things that can be shared with that leadership about this need, right? To make sure that there's more communication, transparency, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think on that point, Victoria, if we flip to the next slide, I'm just going to share some specifics around resources. And so just back to this point of communicating openly and transparently with employees within organizations. One of the really important things here as well as it relates to mental health and supporting individuals from a mental health perspective is to do an inventory of the resources that are available to every individual within the organization. And if you're a small organization with limited resources, it does not mean that there isn't an opportunity to really provide guidance to the employees within your organization. So take a look at the providers that you have in place. So for example, through insurers and employee benefits plans, there are often tremendous resources to support mental health, whether that's through websites or particular tools that are made available through providers. So in many cases, EFAP programs have been contracted by organizations directly. And in some cases, in small organizations, those EAP program resources may be actually combined or integrated with the employee benefit programs. And so just really understanding what those resources are as it relates to EFAP, I'd say first and foremost. Secondly, take a look at the public resources. So Canada has released resources for all Canadians through Canada Together. And I can provide a link through for that particular website where the mental health resources are available. And again, it's access to educational tools and supportive therapies. Again, it's subsidized by our government. And so for those who are in need, there's opportunities to access public resources as well. And then in addition to that, I would promote within those communications also, things like mobile apps around mindfulness, meditation, and resilience. There's some incredible virtual fitness training programs that are now being made available as well. And then tools like we offer here at Wello, virtual healthcare benefits, if they are available within your organization. So bottom line is just really take a leadership position especially if you're in an HR capacity within your organization, in pulling together an inventory of those both internal resources as well as external resources, and doing a focused communication out to the employee group around those resources. So it just creates a great opportunity to open up the conversation, to recognize that this is a challenge that many individuals are working through or are potentially struggling with. And there are resources available, and here's a list as a starting point. And then I would add in those communications as well, an internal nudge for employees who have any questions to be able to reach out to a particular contact within the organization. On top of that, I talked a lot about communication and the importance of frequent and regular communication, particularly during this time, but going forward as well. Can't say enough about how critical that is. And so I wanted to give a couple of examples of how we can ensure that we're maintaining, a lot of connectivity and social connection, and also creating space for open dialogue as it relates to mental health concerns, but also any other types of concerns, fears, or anxieties around what the future of work is going to look like. So first of all, I mentioned Daily Huddle. If you haven't thought about doing a quick daily touch point, I would definitely consider what that could look like. If you're using a tool like Zoom, for example, or any type of technology to manage your virtual meetings, it can be as simple as pulling together, whether it's your team or a group of colleagues, to have a quick touch point each morning. Those can be as short as 10 minutes, and they don't even have to have a specific agenda. Although I will say in our group, we've set a specific agenda which is focused on any wins that we had the day prior, any great team stories anyone wants to share, and then any barriers or concerns that they have going into the day ahead. And I think it's been a really valuable mental health tool for all of us throughout these last 3 months, just to have that check-in in the morning. Not mandatory, it's optional, but everyone really shows up and finds it to be very, very helpful in terms of starting the day on a good note.
I love that point. Sorry to interrupt. I love that point about, starting it with a quick win or something positive, or yeah, that's like a positive reflection or something you're grateful for. Like you said, it's such a support for mental health, not just for connecting people, but just for even getting in that right mindset.
Yeah, and I think if you do it as groups too, right, and just create the space to do that as a group, some days you're going to have certain individuals who are perhaps having a bit of a difficult time that particular day, whether it's due to the weather or something that's, sort of come up for them at home or that's on their plate for the day. And so, someone else can lift them up with a moment of gratitude or a win or a great positive story. So it sort of goes back to the point. There's a great quote about how we rise by lifting others, right? And I think, that's been a really important reminder for us all through these last, as I said, these last 3 months. So that's, I'm just going to share a couple of other quick tips, and then I'll turn it back to you, Victoria, for any other questions. So daily huddle was one that I wanted to share. Also, just the importance of maintaining one-on-ones. So if you have individuals who are reporting to you, if you're reporting into your manager, making sure that you're finding time and you're carving out space for those one-on-ones. And then within that one-on-one time, not necessarily jumping right into work conversation. Carve out a few moments at the top of that one-on-one discussion just to check in with one another. Ask how you're doing. Ask how things are going at home. Just take a moment to really listen and to share also openly and transparently about kind of what's happening with you. Team meetings, I would also add, really, really important. We're trying to do our team meetings, if not once a week, once every 2 weeks, just to take a moment to connect at the beginning of those team meetings as a group as well on how are we all doing, right? How are we doing as a team? How are we progressing? What do we want one another to know about? And then the last thing I wanted to mention as well was around town halls or sort of all company meetings. We're doing these every 2 weeks where we pull together our whole organization. It's pretty fantastic. We have many, many people on Zoom calls. So you just see a screen, lit up with all the wonderful faces of our team members. We're doing fun things from a culture perspective, hat day, Hawaiian shirt day, etc. So you can see one another, just having a bit of a moment of levity, and also just making sure that we're staying focused on culture, right? And a culture of fun and of engagement and of connection through this time. And then the last, that was going to be my last point. I'm adding a last point, which is just really following up on that point about fun. So when we're in physical work environments, we often find times to go out socially, whether it's, going for a drink after work or participating in a charity event, walking or working out together, etc. So thinking about how you can be creative and carve out space in the work week for a bit of a social interaction and a disconnect can be important as well. It can be as simple as, virtual coffee meeting or virtual sort of end of day drink and gathering together. Moment of laughter and sort of sharing, I think it goes a really long way.
I love it. Amazing tips. And I think the theme here is right, that connectivity, and that communication, and yeah, having it, putting that fun back in is so important. I have a question here from Nathan. It says, any tips on how to adjust benefit plans to include things like CPT sessions or access to more options for virtual health qualifying as a benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in terms of modifying plans, I mean, it is really dependent on the type of plan that's in place. But what I would do is take a look at the overall structure of your benefit plan design, really ensure that there's a level of understanding around what employees value within the benefits plan, what employees are utilizing, as a high priority component of the benefit plan, and then what employees would like to see as a component of their benefit plan. I will say, obviously within our organization, we're focused on virtual healthcare. There's been a tremendous increase in the demand for virtual healthcare benefits over the last few months. We have brought on many, many new clients throughout COVID-19. And not just as a result of needing sort of an immediate support uh, with regard to coronavirus, but also ensuring that employees have mental health resources and supports and access to clinical care on an ongoing basis if they have a chronic condition. So if you're looking to carve out budget within your plan for something that is a new benefit like virtual care, and you're working within, sort of a fixed budget, I'd go back to those first points, right? Around what's valued and utilized by employees, and where can you actually find savings to create sort of the space for new benefits to be added. And in many cases, there are very affordable options around, virtual care as an example. We've created some flexibility in our plans and some really affordable options to ensure that, employers can adopt these new benefits as well.
Yeah, it's such an amazing benefit that that people can take advantage of. So I also had one other one. This was a comment just from earlier. She just from Leslie says that's a really interesting comment. RE vacations and how employees might aggregate that time. So I guess I was just wondering if you have other suggestions in terms of how they can, of how that can kind of work uh, in real life situation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is just to take a look at the policy that exists currently, or let's say prior to COVID-19, around vacations. So some organizations have a policy that employees cannot roll over vacation. It needs to be used in the calendar year. And if that's the case, I think just thinking about the dynamics in your organization and work requirements, and if that still needs to be the case, then really just openly and proactively communicating to employees that you're going to hold to that policy, right? So that they have a bit of a heads up on, I won't be able to roll this vacation time, and therefore, I really need to be planful and proactive about how I'm going to use that vacation this year, where perhaps I haven't taken the vacation I normally would. So I say that's the number one thing, is just revisiting the policy. If it's holding as is, making sure you're proactively communicating it to employees so that they each have an opportunity to think about how they'll manage within that. But then also, I would definitely encourage some flexibility around potentially modifying the vacation policy if that can work in your work environment, given the challenges that we've had in the last few months and the need for that flexibility. So in some organizations, we've seen a bit of a balanced approach where at least half of the vacation needs to be taken in the calendar year, and you can roll potentially half of the overall vacation time into the following year. But again, I think it depends on every organization and what's going to make sense. What we want to avoid, and what we're hearing from a lot of our clients, is really just wanting to avoid this sort of gathering of vacation time, and then this like high demand peak period where a lot of employees are looking to take their vacation as we get to the back half of the year at the same time, which
Mm-hmm.
can create challenges just in terms of being able to maintain business requirements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did want to open it up actually to just to the group and see if anybody wanted to share any kind of practical solutions, or maybe even barriers and solutions that they've experienced as they started to reopen and how they've supported employee mental health. It's sometimes interesting to hear just those unique stories of we've tried this and this worked great, or we tried this and it didn't work and this is what we did to address that issue. So are there any questions or are there any comments just from the group here, who's in attendance who'd like to just share their experience? I know some, we're starting to reopen. It depends on your region or your area, of what you'd like to of what's worked or what hasn't worked and how you've overcome that. I'll just give you kind of a minute to plug in any answer or a question there if you have that. I did have another question here from somebody who asked a question before we logged on here, and it was, are there any other just innovative strategies that you're currently seeing people adopt? So it's a pretty broad kind of question, but do you have anything, Laura, you'd like to share?
Sorry, just around just general practices?
Yeah, anything that was kind of innovative to help re-engage people and support their mental health as they move forwards into reopening business.
Um, I'm just trying to think if I have any great creative, innovative things that are top of mind. We've heard all kinds of different sort of scenarios in organizations. I'd say one particular client of ours is really taking an approach where they're leaving it up to employees, and I thought that was fairly novel. They're in they're in an environment where there's a combination of sort of manufacturing and office type work. And what they're really doing is giving employees the option to sort of self-identify if they are ready to return to work, and if so, accommodating them in returning to work. If they are not ready to return to work for whatever reason, and they don't have to get into detail,
Mm-hmm.
they're looking to create options for them to stay working remote as well. I thought that was pretty interesting because,
Yeah.
and I know it's not the case in every organization, and the fact that they have a manufacturing facility as well, it would lead you to believe that they would be just pulling people back into work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the nature of the business requirements.
Mm-hmm.
But they have really extended this flexibility in a way that I think is very meaningful, to be cognizant of the fact that some employees are very concerned and anxious about returning into that environment.
Yeah, I love that. And then there's so many different unique situations that people are experiencing as well. So I remember working with one organization, and they, it impacts their benefits too, right? If they readily say in writing somewhere that they are not willing or not wanting to return to work, but then they're giving up that benefit that they're getting for being off. But having those kind of conversations with them to allow to give it the preference to those who are like ready and eager and not maybe having as many reservations as other people, just to kind of balance that out. But listening to people is such a great is so important, and a great approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it seems so simple, right? But it really is about asking the questions and listening and responding, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you may have employees, that's the thing, it's not a one size fits all. You have some employees who are just anxious to return to work, right? They'd like to get out of the environment, let's say, that they have at home. If it's if they feel isolated at home, or if there's too many distractions, they're anxious to return into their office environment. And I think that's important to be considerate of. And then you've got the flip of that, where some employees are anxious to return to work and want to stay working at home. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you really create flexibility around sort of managing all of these scenarios wherever possible?
Exactly. Or if they were temporarily laid off, and who do you select to come back when you're opening, all of those things. So I see some other comments here too. Just an interesting comment says, from Nathan, says, it seems like the built environment or healthy buildings will increase in popularity even more because of this pandemic. So he's excited for that. And then I just had another comment here from Nancy, who just shared a really neat article, which we can share with everyone else. It's about how leaders need to demonstrate empathy and compassion with everyone. So we can share that as we follow up. So we're just about at 11 here. So I did just want to do a quick wrap up, and thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your expertise and sharing your time with us today on how we can support employees returning to work and to support their mental health. The demand is so real right now, and we need to be listen and have this open communication, create that culture of trust, and make sure that there's overall, just in general awareness and validation that we are experiencing trying times and we need to support each other. So we will be following up after today's session with a couple of resources that were shared today. The session was recorded as well, so we will have a recording for those who would like to go through and get some of the great tidbits of information that was learned today. And we do have a quick survey as well to share as well. And then also I just heard Laura just shared here as well that that Wellness Together Canada is such a great resource for people. They have assessments for individuals to go through, and it links you up to resources and support that are individualized towards individual needs. So it's a great resource. So we'll share that as well as other resources after today. So again, I want to thank you everybody for attending today's session, and wish everyone the best heading into this new environment, and supporting everyone to be healthy and well, and to move upwards and onwards. So thank you again, and we will chat soon.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thanks, Lori.